This thing won't stay up. Hopefully you guys can still see me. Blah blah blah.
Well, we've come to the end of the road, ladies and gentlemen. We finally made it to the last episode of Dexter Original Sin. Another great episode, so this will be my final recap and review. Let's get into it. The 10th and final episode was called Code Blues, and it opens up with another flashback of young Brian and Dexter in the shipping container. Brian's comforting Dexter, and Dexter keeps calling for their mom, who is, of course, chopped up into little pieces on the floor. And Brian is comforting him the whole time, singing songs. Harry, of course, finds them and only grabs Dexter. And then we cut to older Brian talking to his therapist, Petrie, who we know from a previous episode that he kills, but he says to him, "That is the first time my brother was taken from me, but it wouldn't be the last." And then once again, we see Barb, the social worker, taking him away in the car. Young Brian says, "Isn't Dexter coming?" Barb says, "Not this time, we're going to find you a new family." We see what happens to Brian when he gets with this new family, and their son locked him in a closet, and he's having flashbacks to banging on the shipping container. And when the mom lets him out of the closet, he attacks her. So then he goes to a group home, and the older boy sitting next to him steals his food. So Brian stabs him in the hand with a fork. And then finally, he's brought to Harbor Light Hospital. He's diagnosed as being antisocial, lacked empathy. They called him a psychopath, and he was just 7 years old at the time. And then they show him getting older as he's staying in this hospital, and he says the only constant in his life was Raul, who we know he also kills. He said he's the only person who cared about me, but then he kind of betrayed him by giving away his meds. And Brian says to him, "No wonder I'm not getting any better," because he's supposed to be on like 3 new medications. Raul called him crazy and Brian called him a liar. So we are seeing how all these people pretty much abandoned him or gave up on him and why he chooses to kill them. Petrie, his therapist, says, "You're making progress." And Brian says, "Enough to go see him now?" Meaning Dexter. And Petrie says, "You probably shouldn't see him. He's a trigger for you. You don't want to backtrack." Brian says, "He's all I have in this world. Why am I doing this? So I can work at Radio Shack the rest of my life?" Brian says, "I suppose there's nothing more you can do to me." So he beats the crap out of Petrie and kills him and steals his car. In our next scene, we see Captain Spencer driving, and he leads Dexter to a giant cargo ship. Dexter says that this whole time they've been searching all over the place for Nikki, and this ship is only half a mile from Miami Metro Station. So in the previous episode, Dexter sort of cut Spencer loose so that he could get away to lead him to Nikki, because otherwise they would never find him in time. And sure enough, Spencer led him right to him. Our next scene, we're at the hospital with Bobby and his wife, and Harry's there. Deb shows up. They tell Bobby's wife that they're like family. The wife leaves to take the kids home. We find out that Bobby is in and out of consciousness. LaGuardia shows up and tells Harry that a chopper spotted a body on a roof of a building, dismembered with a chainsaw. LaGuardia tells him that the victim's name is Barbara Plimpton, and Harry obviously knows her, but he doesn't let LaGuardia know this. LaGuardia asks, "Do you think this could be our guy?" Our next scene, Dexter follows Spencer onto the ship. Dexter makes a bunch of noise and calls for Spencer to distract him so that Dexter can get to Nikki first. Nikki's trying to call for help, but he's pretty weak. In our next scene, we're on the rooftop with the crime scene with Barb. Vince and Tanya there are working the scene. Dexter, of course, isn't, which Harry's obviously happy about because this could be a trigger for Dexter. Harry knows that it's Brian who did this. Barb was cut into 6 pieces. LaGuardia says, "What kind of monster would do this? All that rage." And Brian is watching from up above at another building nearby, and Harry sees him. Harry leaves the crime scene, and LaGuardia is like looking around for him. Now we're back on the cargo ship with Spencer and Dexter. Spencer shoots a flare gun at Dexter, and they fight. They go at it. Spencer tries to strangle Dexter. Spencer body slams Dexter, hits him with like a fire extinguisher or something, and he gets away temporarily. He turns the lights back on after Dexter previously turned them off. Nikki is still calling for help, but Spencer turns on the water to quickly fill up where Nikki is. And Nikki is chained to the floor. Dexter is like pleading with Spencer, saying, "That's your son." And Spencer says, "Is he?" Which confirms one of my theories that I thought one of Spencer's motives could be that he found out Nikki isn't really his son, because they made a point of telling us that his wife was cheating for 14 years. So Nikki is not actually Spencer's son. Dexter says he doesn't deserve this. Spencer says, "Deserve has nothing to do with this." Dexter says, "What kind of monster are you?" Spencer says, "You can save him or come after me. So the question is, what kind of monster are you?" Spencer gets away and Dexter goes to save Nikki, tries to unchain him, successfully does, and then Dexter sets off a flare gun and the police are on their way in this little raft. Now we are on the rooftop where Brian was watching the crime scene down below, and Harry shows up with a gun. So Harry and Brian finally come face to face, which was one of my predictions yesterday in my final predictions for the last episode, which seems to be the only prediction that I got right out of all of my predictions. But I was so happy to see these two come face to face finally. Brian says to Harry, "Did the chainsaw give me away?" Harry says this just confirmed what I already knew. You're on some kind of twisted revenge quest. And then Harry runs through all of Brian's victims, like Barb the social worker, your therapist, Raoul the orderly. We find out that his second victim at Coconut Grove was the son of his first host family. His third victim was the kid from the group home who stole his food. Harry says you use them as bait so you can watch Dexter work their crime scenes. Brian's been desperate to just see Dexter. Harry tells him Petrie's right, you shouldn't contact Dexter, and I'll make sure you never do. Brian says it's too late, and they show a flashback to the restaurant scene from episode 2 when Brian asks Dexter, "Is anyone sitting here?" And Brian asks Harry, "What did you do to Dexter to make him forget his own brother?" Harry says he was so young and traumatized he blocked it all out. Brian says, "How convenient. Is that why you threw me away? So you wouldn't have to tell him the truth? You slept with his mom, made her snitch, and sent her to the cartel to get chainsawed, and then sent his brother into the system so you can have him all to yourself." Harry says, "You couldn't be saved. Dexter could." Brian says, "Dexter needs me." Harry says, "You're right. He needs you to let him go. If you come back into his life, you're going to bring him pain and suffering. Is that what you want for your little brother? I saved Dexter from all that. I gave him a life he couldn't have with you." Harry also says, "Two things can be true at the same time. You can hate me for good reasons and still know that I am the best thing for Dexter." Brian says to him, "You really think you're the hero?" And Harry says, "Far from it, but I am going to bring you in." And he pulls out his handcuffs and he says, "If you truly love your brother, you're not going to say a damn thing." So this is interesting that Harry wants Brian to come in and, go to jail for these murders, but doesn't want Brian to reveal the truth behind it all and why he's doing this. Harry does not want it to be revealed the connection between Brian and Dexter. So this is a little risky to arrest Brian and expect him to keep his mouth shut. But Brian says, "I'm not going to prison. You're going to have to finish what you started when you threw me away 17 years ago." Brian grabs Harry's hand that is holding his gun and puts it to his head. He's like testing Harry to shoot him. Harry wasn't going to pull the trigger. He takes his finger off the trigger, but then Brian knocks him out. Our next scene, we have Becca, Spencer's ex-wife. She's watching the news, waiting for an update on Nikki. Her fiance, Nelson, goes tumbling down the stairs because Spencer's upstairs and knocks him out. Spencer wants to kill her. She's hiding in another room, and Spencer is yelling at her through the door and says, "You told me he was my son." She says, "What did you do to Nikki?" He says, "Same thing I'm going to do to you, but I'm going to look you in the eye when I do it." Luckily, Dexter comes in to save the day. He injects Spencer with the tranquilizer, and as he's dragging Spencer out of the house, he walks by the TV that has the news on it, and he sees the story about the chainsaw, Brian's crime scene, and he's kind of curious about it. He tilts his head, but he keeps on moving. Now we are back on the rooftop with Harry. He is handcuffed, but he has the key so he can free himself. He grabs his gun, and then we see that Brian wrote in blood on the wall saying, "You're right." Brian is admitting that Harry is right about what he said, that Brian being in Dexter's life will only bring him pain and suffering. Brian knows what it is to be tortured by these memories of what happened to them and their mother. And through all of his sick twistedness, deep down he really does love Dexter, and he still sees him as his baby brother that he was ripped away from, and he doesn't want Dexter to remember, at least not for the moment. He wants Dexter to have a life that Brian wasn't able to have. As sick as Brian is, that's so sad. So by him telling Harry, "You're right," I guess that explains why Brian leaves Dexter alone for the next several years until we see him in season 1 of the original show. Our next scene, Dexter is on Camilla's boat with Spencer strapped down again. He says to Spencer, "How does it feel to ruin your whole life and your legacy?" Spencer says, "I taught her a lesson." And then Dexter holds up the weapon to Spencer's face so that he can see himself in the reflection. And Dexter says, "Look at yourself, you failed." And Spencer says, "If you only knew how your dad failed you." Spencer says, "I'm the captain, you're a psychotic piece of shit." And then Dexter kills him with what looks like a machete, and Dexter chops him up into pieces. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time he dismembers one of his victims. And it's interesting that he does that after seeing the news story about the chainsaw. And then we see Harry at home having a drink. On the news, they say that they found Nicky and that Nicky says his own father kidnapped him, which is so crazy. Like, one of my predictions was that Nicky was going to die so that no one would find out the truth about Spencer, because in my opinion, it doesn't really make sense that in the original show, when everyone thinks Dokes is the Bay Harbor Butcher, that no one would say, like, oh my god, this is the second time that one of our own has done something like this. But as we know, there are some inconsistencies between the original show and the prequel show, and I guess there is a difference between Spencer and the Bay Harbor Butcher. Spencer was more like a crime of passion, I guess you could call it. The Bay Harbor Butcher is more of like a true sick serial killer that's very methodical. And, I wouldn't really compare Spencer to the Bay Harbor Butcher. So maybe that's why it never comes up. I don't know. But we're still at home with Harry. Dexter gets home. He admits that he shouldn't have stopped Dexter from going after him. He says, "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you." And Dexter says, "I didn't listen to you either." And that's when Harry realizes Dexter killed Spencer. Harry's obviously having a hard time with who Spencer truly was. He says, "I've known Spencer for years, never imagined he'd be capable of this. I saw what I wanted to see, not what he actually was." Dexter says Spencer was good. He wasn't born a monster. He became one. But me, I was born this way. And then Harry is getting little flashbacks to Dexter when he's young and when he was good, before what happened to his mother. He was this sweet little boy that didn't have these urges. He was burying a poor little lizard when Brian was over here popping tails off of dozens of lizards. So Harry knows that Dexter wasn't actually born this way, but he does not say this to Dexter. He says, "Yes, you were born this way, but I couldn't be prouder of what you've become." That just pisses me off. I've said before, like, Harry is low-key the villain of the entire show. He really turned Dexter into what he is. He should have just told Dexter the truth. Like, you are this way because of something very traumatic that you went through, but we can work through this. We can get you the help that you need, where you can deal with these emotions caused by that traumatic experience and you can overcome it. But whatever. Dexter says, "Thank you for believing I could be more, for showing me I can channel my urges." And then we're back at school with Deb. Her and Sophia apologize to each other. They're friends again. Then we're back at Miami Metro. Batista and Harry are talking. They're searching everywhere for Spencer. Harry knows that they're never going to find Spencer. Harry says, "How do we miss all of this evidence?" And Batista says, "You have too much history and he's too good of a liar." Angel also asks him, "How was your case with LaGuerta?" And Harry says, "She was wrong. There isn't any connection." And LaGuerta overhears this. So this might play into season 2. That was the last we see of LaGuerta. She's obviously super sus of Harry, which also begs the question, how does she not remember Brian Moser in the future? I've said before, after 15 years of cases, she's bound to forget one single person. But just the fact that she is this suspicious of Harry, I don't know, you would think that it would stick in her head a little bit. And then we see Dexter get promoted from intern to joining the department full time. He gets a new laminate. Finally, Bobby is alive and awake. Looks like he's going to survive, which I'm super happy about. I thought that he was going to die. I talked about this in my prediction video yesterday, but I'm glad he's alive. And then finally, at the end of the episode, Deborah, Dexter, and Harry go out to eat to celebrate Dexter's promotion. Deb also has good news. She wants to join Miami Metro. She wants to be a part of something that matters, and Harry is thrilled about this. By the way, they are back at the restaurant that we first see Brian show up in episode 2. Deb's on the dance floor celebrating all the good news. This move of hers right here reminded me of when her and Brian, at the time known as Rudy, were dancing in season 1. And then Harry and Dexter are watching Deborah dance. They're talking. Harry says, when I taught you the code, I thought it would give you a way to deal with your urges on your own. On that ship, you could have gone after Spencer and left Nikki to die, but you didn't. You chose to save a child instead of giving into your own compulsions. Dexter says, I controlled my urges. Harry says, you channeled them for good. Dexter says, thanks to your code, and Harry says, it's your code now. So yeah, this just proves that Dexter really is a good person deep down. He kind of struggles with this the entire show, the original show. He thinks that he's this true monster, but he's not. And then we see Brian show up. He sees Dexter, having fun with Deb and Harry. And that is our last shot of the season. So Brian really is watching him have this great life that Brian never got to have. And I think deep down, he wants this for his brother. He loves him and he wants him to continue living this good life. I kind of have a feeling that we're not going to see Brian in season 2. I mean, maybe we will. I kind of hope we do, but a part of me thinks that this storyline is wrapped up. He admitted that Harry is right. Dexter can't have a good life if Brian tells him the truth. We know that Dexter doesn't meet him for another 15 years, so I kind of think Brian's just going to go away. He's going to leave Miami, and we're not going to see him again in season 2. In a way, this almost mirrors the original show. In season 1 of the original show, we got Brian, and then his story was over. And now for the prequel show, we got Brian in season 1, but now his story is over once again. So yeah, I thought it was a great episode, great conclusion to the season. I feel like all the loose ends are tied up. One thing I'll say was there wasn't really any payoff with Sanders' storyline. I feel like there should have been a little bit something more there. And I'm super bummed that we didn't get another little scene for Dexter Resurrection. If you remember in episode 1, the premiere, it opened up with current day Dexter being brought to the hospital. And I felt like the finale was going to end with Dexter waking up on the hospital table. I cannot believe that they didn't tease Resurrection a little bit more. But great season for Dexter Original Sin. I'm hoping we get a season 2. I think we will. The creators confirmed that they've always kind of planned for it to be multiple seasons. And Patrick Gibson just recently spoke about how he is so down to do more seasons. I did a video on that a few days ago if you want to go check it out. Also, I'm super sad that these recap and review videos are over. I enjoy talking about the show with you guys, so it just sucks that we don't have any more new Dexter for a few months. We're going to get Resurrection in June, so it will be here before you know it. But this is definitely not the end of Dexter content on my channel. I plan to do some videos for the original show, the first 8 seasons, as well as New Blood, and as we get more updates for Resurrection, I'll be posting about that here as well. Maybe some theories for Resurrection. We are not going anywhere as far as the Dexter videos. But please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you so much for following along with me during the season of Dexter Original Sin, and I will see you guys next time.